by James Freeman. James Freeman, The Wall Street Journal biography at Freeman. WSJ James Freeman at WSJ.com. August 28, 2019, 4:33 p.m. ET. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont and Sen. Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts at a Democratic presidential debate in Detroit on July 30. Photo: Lucas Jackson / Reuters. Leftist politicians have been saying for years that a dramatic rise in wealth and income inequality is the central economic problem of our time. It remains the go-to explanation among Democratic presidential candidates for their myriad schemes to increase federal taxation. But the claim of an inequality surge is getting much harder to make, and even for those who cling to the belief that recent decades have led to record levels of inequality, they will have to explain why wages in the Trump era have lately been moving a little closer to equality. On the latter point, the inconvenient truth for the inequality obsessed appears in the most recent employment report from the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics. For the past year, average hourly earnings for employees on private non-farm payrolls have increased 3.2%. But looking beyond that overall average, we see that wages for production and non-supervisory employees are rising slightly faster. In other words, workers' wages have lately been rising faster than their bosses' wages. Don't expect Bernie Sanders to credit Trumponomics. Democratic presidential candidate John Delaney talks to James Freeman on Fox Nation's Deep Dive about the merits of innovation and job creation. Image: John Locker, AP. But not all Democratic presidential candidates are as ideological as Vermont's most famous Marxist. This week, former Rep. John Delaney, D.M.D., appeared with your humble correspondent on Deep Dive on the video streaming service Fox Nation. When asked about recent wage gains during the Trump era compared to an Obama era characterized by rising stock prices but disappointing earnings for the average worker, Mr. Delaney responded, "I think the economy up until recently has done pretty well and I'm happy about that. And I think the Obama dynamic was a little bit distorted because if you think about the situation President Obama walked into, which is the greatest economic disruption since the Great Depression, and we put a huge amount of stimulus into the economy which obviously benefited people who owned assets because that's really what happened. So it really did create a spike in inequality, but there was no other way you had to put stimulus in. Even accounting for the Obama inequality spike, it seems the distribution of wealth and income really hasn't changed all that much." This column has chronicled significant flaws in the claim that recent decades have seen a massive surge in U.S. income inequality. This already shaky thesis may not survive the upcoming formal publication of a working paper by Gerald Auden of the U.S. Treasury and David Splinter of the Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation. They find there has been relatively little change since 1960 in the income share received by the top 1% of U.S. earners. After a draft of the paper was released last year, Paul Salmon of the PBS NewsHour of all places wrote, "You thought income inequality was rising dramatically, right? Well, so did I. In fact, maybe you thought so in part because I and journalists like me have been reporting it as fact, for decades. But maybe we're wrong, all of us." Mr. Salmon reported that the Auden-Splinter draft paper enjoys widespread respect in the economics profession, even if not everyone is willing to admit it. According to Mr. Salmon, one tax professor friend considered the question so politically sensitive that he asked not to be quoted by name after having put it to me this way in an email when I asked if the research held up. "There is a widespread public perception that the distribution of income and wealth has become so much more unequal, a consensus so strong that no one is really allowed to question it in public. This is why my friend prefers to remain anonymous." But he is hardly alone in his opinion, if not his diffidence. At University of Michigan economics professor Jim Hines wrote, regarding his tax researcher colleagues, "Not only is the paper rather famous in my world, people think it is basically right, and I might add that I think it is right. As for wealth inequality, economic historian Philip Magnus recently reported that based on data from the Federal Reserve, the richest 1% of Americans today own only a slightly higher percentage of the nation's wealth than the 1%ers of the early 1960s. Will this message penetrate the Democratic debate bubble? Mr. Delaney for his part still insists that inequality has been rising and is a serious problem, but he made clear in our discussion that he's most concerned with allowing people in the bottom half of the income ladder to grow their wealth and incomes, which should be a priority for all lawmakers. The truth is that at least some economic inequality is necessary for our prosperity. Inventors and entrepreneurs have to know they will be rewarded for their creations. Mr. Delaney, who founded 2 public companies before entering politics, responded to this point by saying, "I'm a capitalist at my core. I believe the U.S. private economy has been the greatest innovation and job creation machine ever created. And we should not be throwing that out the window. But we always make capitalism more just. That's what we do. We used to let kids work in factories and we stopped that. And a continued evolution is the way I think about it." So far Mr. Delaney isn't a polling success, but that doesn't mean he isn't influencing the Democratic presidential debate. His attacks on single-payer health care have forced even Bernie Sanders to rewrite his plan. Perhaps Mr. Delaney can now help Democrats focus on expanding opportunities for all Americans to succeed as capitalists, rather than punishing those who do. Bottom story of the day: it's always in the last place you look with duct tape and 72 magnets. Scientists are looking for a meteorite on the bottom of Lake Michigan. Chicago Tribune, August 28. Follow James Freeman on Twitter. Subscribe to the Best of the Web email with one click. To suggest items, please email best@wsj.com. Teresa Votso helps compile Best of the Web. Thanks to S. Van Fleet. Mr. Freeman is the co-author of Borrowed Time, now available from Harper Business. Copyright 2019 Dow Jones & Company Incorporated, all rights reserved. 8799 Oak Bait 56818 D5 at 44C7B1 CD 8 Let's block ads. Why?